Welcome everyone to Melfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the X-Files Season 2 Episode 8. It's called One Breath. So spoilers for the episode as always. This is a big one and earlier than I thought. Scully's back. I don't know how they did the shooting schedule around her pregnancy and whatnot. I wonder if they shot like all of the scenes that she was in for like the not last episode because she was completely missing in that one, but the few before that. I wonder if they did all of her scenes for the first like 5 or 6 episodes as early as possible so she could leave, go and be on maternity leave for a reasonable amount of time before she's then brought back in for this one. I don't know. One of the big things as I was thinking about as I was watching this, because this is a very emotional episode, it's a very high tension episode. Scully's back, but she's in a coma. It looks like she's going to die. Obviously, it's season 2 of the X-Files. I never believed for a second she would. But the characters are wrestling with this idea that she might be about to die and are even talking about taking her off life support, which is to respect Scully's wishes, a will that Mulder himself saw her write. He was the witness to that will. He knows that's what she would want in this situation, but they're all kind of fighting with doing what she would want, what the logical choice is, and what they want to do out of love, passion, or in Mulder's case specifically, definitely anger. And he's got a thirst for justice, a thirst for vengeance in this episode, and that's kind of tested throughout by other characters, like how far is he willing to go. So that's a big part of this. And it's a good episode. I think one of the things that I was thinking about as I was watching it, though, is that it's almost a shame that this had to be as early as it is, because we are, it's early season 2. We've barely had a season and a bit of Mulder and Scully being a team and bonding. And I was thinking as I was watching this, especially when it was getting really up there in terms of like the drama and Mulder screaming at doctors, thinking they're conspirators and things like that, was that, oh, this would be hitting even harder if this was like season 4 or 5. And it's a mild thing, but it was something that did pop into my head. It is almost a little bit of a shame that the real world situation, and I'm not blaming Gillian Anderson for getting pregnant, but it's just a little bit of a shame that the real world of it caused this to happen maybe a little bit earlier than it would have otherwise, had they just been making creative choices. I mean, maybe they planned in this anyway, but I doubt it. It feels like this was maybe an idea that was pulled forward, or maybe even just created out of the idea that they had to have limited screen time with her for a little while. Either way, what's here is very solid, because it very much is about testing Mulder, and I think one of my favourite things about the whole episode is it all builds up to him making this choice to give up his chance at revenge. To me, that was the emotional, like, linchpin, I guess, of the episode. All through the thing, he's yelling at doctors, worrying that they're conspirators, because Scully just shows up at this hospital. So he's suspecting the doctors and nurses at the hospital of being shady and being part of Cancer Man's whole thing, which I guess I'm calling them that now because that's what Mulder called them in this episode, and it's easier to say. It rolls off the tongue better, I guess. But he is avid that he wants justice, he wants revenge. He's trying to contact Mr. X with what I can only describe as a very cheap version of a bat signal. He literally puts an X on his window with tape and shines a light at it. And I don't know if this is something that they'd established off camera as a way to try and get in touch with him, or if this is him just assuming he's being watched by his men or by people associated with him, so he's taking a chance by shining the X signal out into the ether. But I got a chuckle out of that, just in a thing. Yeah. Mulder is in a bad place throughout this episode. There's one point early on where, and this is before Scully is even back. I think it's before she's even back. I think it's right before he gets the phone call saying that she's back. He's just lying in bed, or lying in the couch rather, watching porn. But he's just lying there, kind of looking depressed. It's a very it's a very sad state of affairs to just be listening to porn and looking into the nothingness, like your life is just empty. But it really sets the tone for where he is in this episode. And he's determined to find out what's going on. And it kind of bubbles up when there's this mysterious guy who tries to steal Scully's blood in the middle of the episode. And Mulder chases him out of the hospital into the parking area. And Mr. X jumps out and grabs Mulder and tells him to let it go. That he needs to he's not willing to go far enough, that this isn't going to get her back, and that Mr. X isn't there to serve him, that Mulder is there to serve Mr. X when he needs something. And Mulder just breaks away and chases the guy anyway. And it all comes to a head when Mr. X ends up jumping out to save his ass when this guy's fighting Mulder. And he breaks this guy's arm and then makes it clear that Mulder's not willing to go far enough to get the answers he wants. And then makes the example of how far you have to go by going over to this guy who was stealing the blood and executes him point blank with the gun. He just kills him. It's shot kind of in a way where it's not obviously ultra graphic. It's just the shadow on the wall you see of the gunshot itself. But it's really telling this idea. It really feels like the show is like saying that, hey, Mulder's digging deeper into these things and he's getting to a higher level now where things are getting more dangerous, the stakes are higher, and the people here are just killing people left and right. Even Mr. X, who's supposed to be an ally, he's supposed to be someone that he can rely upon. He's the replacement for Deep Throat. But as Mr. X even says in this episode, like, working with you got Deep Throat killed, and I ain't going to let that be me. Mr. X also says something interesting, where he says that he used to be Mulder, that once upon a time, earlier in his career, he was effectively like Mulder is, and this is what he's transformed into. And it did make me sort of think for a second that maybe part of the heart of this show is to hopefully have Mulder not turn into as ruthless as Mr. X is, and the idea that Scully being in his life will help him like keep a tether onto his humanity, right? And I'm not just saying the word tether because tether's a big thing in this episode with Scully in the boat and the possible afterlife, or the in-between place before the afterlife. But that did sort of jump out to me, that this idea of like stopping Mulder from completely losing his soul and his humanity might be a big part of where we're going from here. And it's a big part of this episode for sure, because Mr. X later gives him like revenge on a platter. He says, hey, I can't get you to the people making all the decisions, but the people directly responsible for kidnapping Scully, they're going to come and search your apartment, and they think you're out of town because here's a plane ticket with your name on it. But if you're waiting in that apartment and you're ready to defend yourself, that could be a way to get justice. Like, it'll be lawfully fine because you shot an intruder, right? He didn't spell this all out. I'm just extrapolating this. But this is the only way you're going to get vengeance on people who are responsible right now. This is it. This is the best option you have. And I think it's interesting that Mr. X is trying to give this to Mulder. Given everything else Mr. X has been with Mulder in this episode, how confrontational he's been, how much he doesn't want to help him, I think it's very interesting and tells me that Mr. X does see a use for Mulder, that he's trying to feed this desire so that he can get it out of his system and then be useful again down the line. I think at least that's part of it. So I thought that was interesting to look at it from that perspective. But this was the big thing I was getting at right from the start of this conversation, is that Mulder, when he's waiting for these guys to show up, these 2 or 3 men, however many it is, that are responsible for kidnapping Scully, it's actually Scully's sister who shows up, who has already been introduced in the episode at this point. And she's a more spiritual character. She talks about feeling Scully's soul, and she tries to talk to Mulder about, even if you hunt down the people responsible, it won't bring her back. She's a very sort of zen and spiritual character, and Scully's mother doesn't seem to necessarily be into this or take it as seriously as she does. Obviously, Mulder believes in a lot of things, but isn't necessarily vibing with this particular set of beliefs. She shows up when he's waiting for this chance at revenge. He's sitting in the dark with a gun, and she basically just convinces him that he shouldn't waste time and he should go and see Scully, that Scully's barely holding on, she's probably going to die soon, and maybe Mulder being there for her rather than chasing for revenge would do more good. And ultimately, Mulder, as reluctant as he is, and as much as he hesitates, he does make that choice. He goes to talk to Scully. He admits when he talks to Scully that he doesn't know if this is helping or if this is going to accomplish anything, but he's here anyway. And that's such a big thing in this show, is this idea of belief, right? Because that's, the whole catchphrase of the show is, I want to believe. And obviously that's not talking typically about faith and spiritualism and religion, but it does neatly branch into it quite naturally, and especially when you consider this idea that Mulder believes in all he does so devoutly that on some level he has to respect other people who believe in something, even if it's not the same thing he believes in. And this, was him doing this for her. And obviously, before this point in the episode, we have all the other things that I was kind of hinting at, with her sister showing up. The whole episode actually starts with Scully's mom talking to Mulder about this experience she had when she was a kid, where she killed a snake with her brothers, but then when she realized that she'd killed something and sort of the actual reality of what she'd done dawned on her, she felt this intense guilt and picked up the snake. And this idea of compassion, this idea of the value of life kind of comes into it here. And Scully's mum saying that she finally kind of understood what her daughter was feeling in that day. And then the other big scene with Scully, other than all the little moments where she's on this boat tethered to the docks that eventually does snap, as if she is going off into the ether. Although, given how it ends with her waking up and she's okay, I kind of took this more in retrospect as the dock itself is the afterlife, right? She's almost at the afterlife. She's literally connected to the other side, especially given that the nurse that is talking to her throughout the episode turns out to not be a real nurse. Like, she was never there, presumably meaning that she is, if not Sharon, taking her to the afterlife, something kind of like that. But ultimately that nurse character says it's not your time. The boat tether snaps and she drifts back the way. We get a scene where she's lying on a table and her father comes up and speaks to her. And if you take this completely at face value, this is her dead father talking to her about his regrets, about wishing he could trade all of his medals and accommodations to spend just a moment more with his daughter, that life is fleeting and he'll get to see her someday again, but not today. So a lot of the scenes throughout the episode are clearly telling you Scully's not dead, right? She's not dying. The characters in the real world all think she might be dying, but all of this stuff is telling you, no, she's not done. She's coming back. She's going to wake up. All of that stuff's there. It is interesting to me as well, or my favorite thing about the whole Mulder making the choice to give up the chance at revenge to go and support Scully. One, the idea that that's the night before she wakes up, so that it seemingly has had an impact, or he can believe it did at the very least, is that he goes back in the morning and his place has been raided. These bad guys did show up. They were there. He could have had his chance at revenge. And he ends up weeping on the floor after this scene. He takes all this in. This felt like an episode where it was really challenging his character about what's important to him and what matters and what he believes in. And I've not even mentioned all the stuff with Skinner and the other Cancer Man stuff yet, which also kind of pushes him to his limit and tests him. He gets this chance to confront Cancer Man and does it at his place, where Cancer Man seemingly lives in a small apartment on his own. He's got no family. He even points that out and says that I would only be doing this if I really believed in it. He says that he likes Mulder and Scully, and that's why she was returned to him, and that Mulder's growing on him, and that he won't kill, because he's, Mulder's got him at gunpoint in this scene, and Cancer Man says, well, if you kill me, you'll never get the truth. So I'm going to win. And it really felt like a hard-hitting moment, because that's all Mulder ever cares about, is finding the truth, right? He's got him hook, line, and sinker, and he has to sort of play into these games in this system if he's going to get anywhere. And then the other side of that is Skinner, who not only helps Mulder in giving Cancer Man's location, although very covertly, at great risk to himself, he refuses to accept Mulder's resignation, which he tries to do during this episode. And he tells this horrific story about when he was in Vietnam, he had to shoot this young boy, and how all the things he believed in just kind of stopped mattering. And I kind of took that as, like, he still obviously has his values, he still wants to do the right thing and all these things, but all these ideas of, like, really believing in something and wanting to fight for a purpose kind of left him, and nothing seemed to matter after he had to do this horrific act. And it's almost like Skinner looks at Mulder. The thing he actually says is that you're willing to go farther than I am, and that's why it's important that you stick around. But it almost is like he respects that Mulder still believes in something so much that he's willing to fight for it, and it's something that he can see has value. And maybe he misses that he once felt he believed in something that he was willing to fight for. So it's showing that there's value in Mulder's deep beliefs, and that's something even when Scully wakes up, she even says, your beliefs gave me strength. That the year and change that she's spent with Mulder doing all these things and having these out of irregular experiences and whatever else, but this idea that Mulder kind of kept her tethered. I feel like that word tether is a big part of this episode. They never actually say it out loud, but you've got the tether on the boat. You've got this tether between Mulder and Scully. You've got even Skinner and Mulder. There's kind of a tether thing here where he tries to break it and Skinner's like, no, I'm not letting you. I'm doing this for your own good, and it's better for all of us if you're still here doing this and fighting this fight. So, plus there's also a fun bit when the first time he confronts Skinner, Mulder, it's after the whole incident at the hospital where Mr. X shot the guy, and Skinner's like, hey, there was an incident at the hospital and there's rumors that you were attached to it. And Mulder just keeps answering with more questions. And he's basically just doing to Skinner what Skinner does to him whenever Mulder asks Skinner questions about a thing that Skinner won't tell him about. And he does kind of flip the tables, and it pisses Skinner off, and it is a little bit funny, right? This is not an episode with a lot of comic relief, but that's as probably as close as we get in this one to having just a bit of a chuckle about what's going on. Because everything else is super serious. Everything else is all, large stakes. Scully's life's in the balance. I think bringing her dad back, one, it does a smart thing where in the flashback at the start, as Scully's mum's telling the story, it reminds you of her father, because you see him briefly in that flashback, which is nice, because it's a little reminder, just to okay, yeah, I remember Dad. I remember that episode from season 1 where he died. But also, just this idea of bringing him back in an episode where Scully herself is almost dying, and that episode for her was such a big deal in season 1 about her beliefs and what she thinks about death and the afterlife, and is it real? Can you communicate? And she made some big choices that episode about her beliefs. She ultimately decided to not go and get proof. It's debatable if it would have been proof, but she chose not to go to the execution to possibly say something or hear something from her father because it kind of scared her. And I think this episode, likewise, not for Scully, but for Mulder, has him making big decisions based on what he believes in. And ultimately, he makes a good choice by the end to go and sit with Scully and be there and be supportive and give her some of motivation that she probably needs. And, you can debate how much that actually had an effect, how much it actually mattered, but that to me is a much more positive ending than that episode was. And not just because Scully's alive at the end of this episode. I think that's the core arcs of both episodes, where Scully kind of gets scared and doesn't go through the door, as it were, by the end of that season 1 episode. Where in this episode, Mulder does choose to go through the door and sort of have that change where he does the right thing by the end. Or not right thing, I don't want to say Scully didn't do the right thing by not going, but he overcame what he thought he wanted all episode, I guess is the way I'd say it. And I think that's a strong character beat. So, yeah, it is interesting. It's interesting whenever this show challenges the characters in what they care about and what they believe in, especially when it's got tying them to each other. The Scully episode from season 1 didn't really have much to do with Mulder himself. It was very much about Scully's own story. This episode is definitely more Mulder's story, but it is inherently tied to Scully the entire time. And perhaps that's because Scully's really the only person that he really cares about at this point. He doesn't really seem to have a lot of other people. I think it's interesting, though, that we explored these themes this episode of what he believes in, how much that drives him, how much his humanity is at stake here by what he's choosing to do, whether or not he's going to support Scully or hunt for revenge. I think it's very interesting that we get all those themes in this episode, where aliens and alien abductions and UFOs have nothing to do with anything here. Now, obviously, whatever Cancer Man's men and whatever they were doing with Scully, yeah, that probably had something to do with alien DNA or something, but it's not that important in this episode what the science of that was. It doesn't matter here. It's all about the revenge. It's all about the getting revenge for Scully when arguably that means you've already given up on her if you think you need to get revenge for her, kind of thing. So yeah, and maybe in a weird way you could look at it and say, Mulder choosing to go back and sit by her side rather than keep hunting for revenge is almost like he's not making the same mistake that her dad did. Not that the dad was in the same situation exactly, but just this idea that he always put his military career first. He always put what he believed in and his duties first, whereas Mulder gave up something that he was passionate about all episode to go and be there for her. And I think that's the heart of the episode. And I've not even mentioned the lone gunman popped up in this one. I didn't even recognize the guy when he first showed up, because he shows up well dressed at the hospital. And then I'm like, is that one of the lone gunmen? And then sure enough it is. They go back to the lone gunman office and they're basically analysing her medical charts and looking at the DNA. And there's like modifications here. Someone's been tinkering with her and doing experiments. And they all think she's going to die as well. They think it's a done deal. I mean, maybe the only notable thing here is that they've got not a new member, but there's like they've got like a friend on the internet who is like a mysterious person. He's just like an alias who does some info for them here. He like analyzes the medical charts. It's funny actually. At one point they say, "Hey Mulder, do you want to hang out this weekend? We're going to go on the internet and what was it? We're going to debate the theory of Earth 2, I think was what they said." And I laughed a little bit at that line. It's a little bit funny on its own anyway, but I laughed at that line because I'm watching it in 2024, because to me, the only thing that dated that line was the part of the sentence where they said, we're going to go on the internet. No one says that. No one says we're going to go on the internet like it's a thing. We're just always on the internet now. So no one says, I'm going to go online. I'm going to go on the internet. It's just taken for granted that you're online all the time, so it doesn't matter. That's the part of that sentence that sounded dated. The idea that these ultra nerds would be going on and debating Earth 2, especially as a fan of comic books and DC comics, where like Earth 2 is a big thing in that, I'm like, oh, these could totally be dudes today. You just change the wording of that sentence just a little bit, and that sounds so accurate. But this is like, what, 1994, 1995 we're on right now? And the internet's in its early days. I had never touched the internet by this time. So, yeah, it's ahead of its time or something. Yeah, so, no, super, super interesting episode. I mean, I do, if I'm being critical, I wouldn't say every single element was a complete home run. Like, the realization at the end when Scully's like, hey, I want to speak to that nurse who was helping me and taking care of me, and it turns out she's not real, she didn't exist, and Scully just sort of clutches her cross that Mulder gave her back and is like looking up into the distance like, oh my god, right? That was, like, that was fine, but it didn't, like, I wasn't super excited about how they revealed that necessarily. Like, I get it, I get what they're doing with it, but it didn't necessarily wow me or anything like that. It was just kind of like, okay, you're doing that, that's fine. There's a little joke actually, I think it's her sister that gives her like a VHS tape. It's like a Super Bowl thing, and Scully just goes, oh, I knew there was a reason to live, like really deadpan. And I'm like, that's Scully. That delivery of that line, it's almost like they realized that even when she wakes up, it's going to be a very downer episode, and she's not going to be like full Scully yet because she's just woken up from a coma, and she's going to be happy she's alive and her family's around her being upset. But they gave you that line, they gave you that little bit of just sarcasm just to make you hear the real Scully. Like, okay, Scully's back, she's going to be here, we're going to be fine. So that's nice to, but yeah. So yeah, very solid, very, very emotional episode. I think it's a big thing for Mulder's character, if nothing else, him being pushed and tested from every angle. And I think there's also this overall effect in the episode, and I kind of was almost stumbling into this as I was like, I was like, oh yeah, I need to talk about the lone gunman, oh yeah, I need to talk about Cancer Man, because there were so many things going on in this episode, or so many characters coming into the story at various points. I think it gave this impression that by the end of the episode, Mulder really had exhausted everyone around him that he could go to. Whether or not he wanted to go to all of them is another thing, but this episode has lone gunman, it has Cancer Man, it has Skinner, it has every possible like group or person that reoccurs on the show that he could go to, he does. So by the time you get to the end, it really does feel like he's exhausted every avenue, And fundamentally, all that's left to do is to sit and be by Scully's side and give her some real support on a personal level. So I really like that touch as well. So, but yeah, that is One Breath. Thank you for joining me. And actually, what I've been forgetting to do this for the last like 3 episodes, but I'm going to look ahead at what next episode is. I keep forgetting to do it. I think it's because we didn't do it when it was a 2-parter, and then I just kind of like forgot to do it again after that. But anyway, next episode is called Firewalker, and here's the description in IMDb. On a remote outpost, scientists watch as their camera picks up a moving shadow on the inside of a smoldering hot volcano. Too hot for any living creature to survive. Mulder and Scully arrive and notice that everyone is acting strangely. It's a bit weird to go straight to just a regular Mulder and Scully go and investigate shit episode after these last few, but hey, that's cool. Looking at the cast list, I see a dude from Alien Resurrection, I see Bradley Whitford, and I see Shawnee Smith. So we've got a stacked cast of recognizable faces next time, so I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, that is my thoughts on this episode. Thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. You can support all the content by just hitting the like button on YouTube. That helps out a bunch. More people will find us. But you can also go above and beyond by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep the lights on and supporting all the content over there. But thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?